very good evening to you. You are watching This First in Focus, a new edition of it. And you remember the global market reacted on the 9th of November following the presidential elections in the United States. Well, that had many implications. We saw policy changes following that, and also the president-elect Trump making a statement about how exactly his economic policy is going to be designed. Well, we are at a critical juncture when it comes to exports, and today with us we've got the president of the newly established Sri Lanka US Business Council, and he is the new president of the council. Welcome to the show, Mr. Samantha Rajapaksa.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. Well, before we go into the more hot button issues, let's just start off by asking you what your new role is about.
The Ceylon Chamber of Commerce has taken the initiative to form a Sri Lanka US Business Council with the objective of fostering trade between Sri Lanka and US. As the first president of the association, I think my primary role is to establish the association on a very strong footing, and that's where we are right now.
Well, talking about the US elections and the new president-elect's policies when it comes to trade, he seemed to have a very hostile policy towards liberalization. We saw it during his speeches. We also saw it during his statements that were made before the US elections. Well, free markets seem to be restricted in his policy. So will this really uplift or really upset the domestic market in the future?
As far as the new president is concerned, I think there's been a lot said before election. I think if you look at a Sri Lankan context, a lot is said before an election. But when it comes to reality of running a government, maintaining bilateral relationships, that's a different ballgame altogether. I feel it's too early to exactly predict what his trade policies would be going forward. Obviously, he's been pretty open on the fact that it's going to be very much protective of the US companies. If you look at NAFTA, which he comments a lot on, that's almost a 23-year-old agreement, which definitely needs a revisiting and maybe a renegotiation. Similarly, TPP, which is on the drawing board and it's in the implementation stage, he has commented that he needs to revisit that. How I would look at it is Sri Lanka is a very small player in the export markets globally. And I think the impact to us, yes, if it's affecting apparel, that would be a significant impact. But there's so much opportunity. I think if we can, through the association, through the Chamber of Commerce, look at fostering trade effectively between our two countries, between the companies from the two countries, we can definitely see opportunities still.
How much of an interest could you see in the investors in Sri Lanka in investing in the US market or vice versa?
I think it's not purely investment in the US market, but fostering trade with the US companies. If you look at US accounts for more than 25% of total exports going out of Sri Lanka. There's about $3.2 billion worth of trade which happens with US. So there is tremendous opportunity. And if you look at sectors, our main exporter, apparel, accounts for more than 3/4 of the total exports going into US. So there is a whole range of a total market which opens up. And what we attempt to do with the association is to get the companies which are interested in doing business with US. Also facilitate US companies who are interested to do business in Sri Lanka. Make that matching, enable the matching of these companies, so that we can build a good business model.
Well, you spoke about fostering trade ties with the US and also trade ties and the importance of it when it comes to bilateral discussions. What sort of a contribution will trade ties between Sri Lanka and the US have when it comes to the macroeconomy of the country?
Well, there are definitely, if you look at Sri Lanka's economy today, we are very much an import-driven economy. And if you look at the pressures on the imports, it is mainly as a result of a declining exports. because each time, I think when we have a look at the national budget, it's a matter of curtailing imports because of the trade deficit. But I think one key factor which the government is also putting a lot of attention is to creating export industries, looking at FDI to generate exports. Because unless we really build up our export volume significantly, there's always going to be pressure on the trade deficit. So from a macro impact point of view, I think whether it be US or any other market, the need to focus on exports is very critical.
Well, you spoke about the budget. Has the budget really helped this prospect?
The government is making a lot of effort to attract FDI into our country, foreign direct investment. There are a lot of incentives which the government has introduced this time as well to attract foreign investment, because we've seen not so significant growth in foreign direct investment in the recent past. So we are hopeful with the changes, I think, from a Sri Lankan point of view, where it become more conducive for foreign companies to invest in Sri Lanka. Similarly, the business environment for Sri Lankan companies to venture outside and create new markets, which should again have internal as well as external infusion into the economy. Well,
before you are recognized as the president of the Sri Lanka US Business Council, you would recognize yourself as a businessman. Well, being a businessman and assuming that role, how do you think the government should really work on easing restrictions and red tapes?
That's a very good question. I think that's a challenge which the government also is looking to, because for a foreign investor to come in to the country, I mean, for example, Associated Motorways, where I work for, we are a foreign-owned company. There are a lot of barriers, there are a lot of restrictions put in for even a company like ours to invest in Sri Lanka. So for a company which is totally foreign to Sri Lanka, for them to come in, still there are certain unknown factors. There's, I mean, the need for a one-stop shop for an investor to come in and to walk away within a couple of days with the investment already set up is still far-reached right now. So I know there's a lot of effort happening, but I think there is lot of more stakeholders have to really join in and support the government to really make it happen, because if not, we won't see the foreign direct investment coming in the anticipated levels.
Well, we are heading into a new year, 2017. So do you think it's going to be a really good year for investors and businessmen?
I'm always a positive person. If you look at what Sri Lanka has gone through over the past couple of decades, we've had much worse periods than this. Today, Sri Lanka is a sought-after destination as far as tourism is concerned. If you look at Sri Lanka today, is one of the safest destinations in Asia. If you look at the expats who live in Sri Lanka, they love the country. We just need to fine-tune our business model. We need to fine-tune how people do business in Sri Lanka. We need to fine-tune the regulatory framework, and we need to make Sri Lanka more welcoming and easy to do business in.
Well, with that, let's head into a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll have more on Biz First in Focus. Stay tuned. A very good evening to you. You are watching Biz First in Focus, and I am in conversation with the newly appointed president of the newly formed Sri Lanka US Business Council, Mr. Samantha Rajapaksa. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, we were talking about trade ties, and one of the focal points of relations could be tourism, because Sri Lanka is known as a tourism hotspot. But we find a very little amount of Americans coming into Sri Lanka. Why do you think that is?
One thing would be awareness, in my opinion. The average American has little knowledge about Sri Lanka. If you look at the rankings for Sri Lanka as a destination to visit, most of the high-end Americans seem to know about the destination. Recently, I met a U.S. mutual fund manager who was coming with his family to Sri Lanka. But it's a very small minority. And I think it's all to do with the marketing. That's one area the association will also focus on, working with the travel organizations in Sri Lanka to see how we can assist them to promote trade and also try to get a match for them with similar companies in US who can help them to grow the business.
So do you think we need a rebranding when it comes to marketing our destination?
Well, it's either rebranding or taking our brand out there to be known in the in the US market. There has to be a considerable effort in marketing so that we can get to that the US consumer who is a potential tourist who can come to our country. Because if you look at its distance is given as a reason sometimes, but if you look at the number of American tourists going into countries like Thailand, it's enormous. So even if you can get a fraction of that traffic coming into Sri Lanka, that would make a significant impact to Sri Lankan economy.
Well, Sri Lanka has been exporting garments to the United States in bulk, but it's been years since Sri Lanka had ties with the United States. But why now? Why do we need a business council now at this point of time?
Apparel has been a very strong export commodity, and I think if you look at the companies which have established around the industry, they've done a phenomenal growth in really promoting Sri Lanka as an apparel destination. But apparel is just one vertical, and I think there is definitely significant opportunity in a multitude of other industries which Sri Lankan companies can really gear itself to export product and services to the US market. If you look at the information technology sector, there's a lot of great companies which have done great work with US, but I think there's still a lot more opportunity. Because when we compare with our neighbor India, we are just a fraction of what the kind of business they do with the US. Similarly, other services, other manufacturing sectors, which we can really go where we can actually create a competitive advantage, because the Sri Lankan worker is considered as a very highly skilled and knowledgeable worker who can adapt fast. And I think when you look at the high-end apparel, IT, etc., those sectors, we've really proved ourselves. But we need to get out there and really establish those business links to really grow the business.
Well, speaking about our neighbor India, which is also the regional power, it's going through a severe credit crunch, all in the name of tackling corruption. Modi's move has been hailed by many, but also the opposition seems to not really like what is being done to the financial market. Well, does Sri Lanka need to come to terms with its black money or the circulation of it? Or what sort of measures should the government take with regard to it?
I was told that Sri Lanka had underwent a similar exercise in the 1970s. If you look at India, although in the short term there is a credit crunch, there is an impact to business, most of the business partners we work with in India have told it's a short-lived phenomena, but in the medium to long term that things would stabilize and Sri Lanka, the Indian economy would be much better because there's so much liquidity coming into the banking system, and that there would be a turnaround. But it's a bold move done by a very bold leader. And well, Sri Lanka corruption, black money is a issue we talk about all the time. I think it may be one step which the authorities can seriously consider.
Well, with that, let's head into another short commercial break. But when we come back, we will have an extensive discussion with the President of the Sri Lanka US Business Council. Stay tuned. A very good evening to you. You are watching Biz First in Focus. Mr. Rajapaksa, now before we went in for the commercial break, we spoke about the implications President-elect Trump's policies would have on developing countries like us. But The Economist, in one of its articles, it said, quote, "The economic consequences of Trump's presidency could be enormous and costly." Well, now that you are the president of the US Sri Lanka Business Council, are you worried about it?
It's too early to make judgment on what President Trump's policy and actions would be in relation to trade. There are a lot of stern statements made about trade with China. There are a lot of stern statements made about trade with Mexico under the NAFTA. However, we need to see how actually they get actioned in. There are several possibilities. There can be total turmoil in the world markets, or there can be a well-planned out renegotiation of trade treaties. Wherever there is an absolute disadvantage to America, there might be corrections done. So US is the largest economy in the world. So definitely any significant or major upsets in that market can have repercussions across the globe. And Sri Lanka being a very small player in that segment, there can be definitely major impact to the Sri Lankan economy as well.
But moving on, bond prices are slated to see a wobble in the market. While markets, they look for investment against risk. What will this mean to us Sri Lankans?
Well, if we talk specifically about the US bond market, we've seen an all-time high in the bond market with it stabilizing in recent days. If those rates go up, we would see inflow of funds into US. If you look at the impact to Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka's recent budget, approximately about 40% is to be bridged to foreign sourced funding. Well, there can be certain difficulties in raising that foreign funding if there is outflow of funds into the US. That will result in Sri Lankan government need to borrow locally to bridge that deficit. In such a scenario, we might see towards mid or end of next year a slightly upward movement in the local interest rates, which can be challenging to local businesses.
But what would the Sri Lanka-US Business Council really mean for the Sri Lankan expat in the US?
That's a good question. That's not something we've actually looked at from an association point of view. But being someone who has lived in the US prior to this, there is a very strong expat community in the US. There is a very loyal community out there who would love to see Sri Lanka prosper as a developing country. We should capitalize on that, and I think we will take that suggestion actually, or this thought which you brought up from the association point, where we can really use them as a mechanism to foster more trade between the two countries.
Well, Sri Lanka has many entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. What sort of window would the council really open for these entrepreneurs? And would there be any restrictions? Would there be incentives for these people?
Association would be more facilitating role, but what our attempts would be to really support these potential companies to do business with the US. We will work very closely with the local AmCham, the American Chamber, as well as the Sri Lanka US, the US Embassy in Sri Lanka, as well as the Sri Lanka Embassy in the USA. Foreign Ministry, Ministry of Trade, all these are key stakeholders of the Sri Lanka US Business Council. And we can be a catalyst in enabling such entrepreneurs, such local companies, to really get the support required and help them to find markets in the US.
Well, tell us about the plans that are ahead. What sort of plans has the council made in terms of encouraging local investors?
Right now, we are very much at the early stage. We are getting the committee together, and we have our own internal brainstorming to work out what our game plan is going forward. Like mentioned earlier, I think core tasks are to build this very strong foundation for the association, get a very strong membership base into the organization, and then thereafter look at focus areas which you want to develop on. Look at focus industries which we can really focus and concentrate on, and then find stakeholders who can really support the trade association to enable us to meet our objectives of fostering trade with US.
Is the council really looking at new industries to invest in?
We would not be advocating a particular industry. We would look towards supporting all industries, but if there is a particular industry which shows is of significant interest, in particular by US companies or US markets, that's definitely, and if it's new in Sri Lanka, we'll definitely look at really growing that sector.
Well, the Sri Lanka US Business Council is one of many councils that were formed by the Chamber of Commerce. What's new? What sort of new prospects can the council offer from other councils?
Our core objectives would be country specific and would be very similar to other councils within the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Ceylon Chamber of Commerce is a very strong industry body. The membership of some of the or all the reputed companies in Sri Lanka. So that membership gives a lot of strength for fostering trade. For example, if a US company is interested to find a partner in Sri Lanka, or they want to find a manufacturer or joint venture partner or a trading partner, the database of members at the Ceylon Chamber is unmatched. And the Sri Lanka US Chamber, as part of the Ceylon Chamber, we can definitely make use of the resources or the strength of both these organizations to enable that.
Well, the garment industry seems like the biggest exporter to the US. Given that, are there any plans that are ahead in order to expand it, in order to encourage more investors to get into the garment industry?
That is definitely an area we will be focusing on. There is, even in the Business Council, we will always be having one sector representative from the apparel sector who's already in place. And we will work very closely with the apparel sector as a whole to see how we can support them to really promote trade with US.
Thank you very much for joining us, and it was a great conversation. Well, thank you very much for joining us on BizFirst in Focus. Remember, the world around you is changing every minute, so you need to keep in the loop of what's going on. Well, this is where you keep yourself on the know as to what's going on in the business world. So stay tuned tomorrow as we bring in a new perspective about the business world. Thank you and good night.